We would discuss today the preachings of two religious preachers of North India, Kabir and Dadu. Both of them have been taken as the followers of the Bhakti movement, but it appears that there are certain differences between them which we would see. It must be admitted in the beginning that both of them belong to low class and low caste, which makes it very interesting for all of us. Before we go to their preachings, it is necessary to see the circumstances by which they had started their preaching, and that might explain why they had preached in such a way. In looking at the circumstances, we see that there had been certain changes in the North Indian scenery before they had come to give their preachings. First is that earlier, from 7th century AD, there had been a Rajput-Brahmin alliance. The Rajput chieftains or the Rajas, they wanted to be declared themselves as Kshatriyas, and this could only be done by the Brahmins, who did it after getting land and certain other favors. But this alliance, which was there in North India from 7th century, this was rudely shattered by the Turkish conquest in the 13th century. When the Turks came and when they had overrun the North India, part of North India at least, the Brahmins had lost their powers and prestige because the Rajput Rajas had also lost their positions and had gone to the countryside. The Brahmins had followed them, but this was of no avail. The Turkish conquest gradually expanded and they began to control the countryside. So in the years before the rise of these two teachers, we see that there was already an erosion of the power, position and prestige of the Brahmins. Secondly, we see that these Turkish rulers had given iktas or temporary revenue assignments to the nobles, obviously to Turkish nobles. And with the Turkish nobles residing in their iktas, the iktas were gradually being turned into towns, because these Turkish nobles, they continuously demanded the production of crafts and luxury goods. Along with these demands, along with these came the artisans who flocked into the towns, and we find also the merchants and the traders coming into the towns, trying to get a part of the supply of the crafts and luxury goods for their business. So in the total arena of the towns, there was a kind of a confused agglomeration of various kinds of people. The Turkish nobilities on the one hand, the Hindu minorities were there as their employees, the artisans, as well as the merchants and the traders. Now, in the wake of the Turkish adventurers came also some Muslim artisans who flocked into these towns. But they were not alone. They were soon supplemented by the converted prisoners of war, some of whom were later freed, then the free converts, and finally there were the Hindu masons, Hindu carpenters, and so on. So once again, the towns were centers of instability in a sense, that various kinds of peoples were there, working under money economy, and obviously with the artisans at a very low wage. One must also say that the Varnashrama system or the caste system has not been touched by the Muslim rulers. In the Islamic text, there is no criticism of the caste system. Actually, the Hindu rulers, they did not criticize it. They did not try to supplement it or replace it, and Muslim rulers also did not do so. The reason is very simple. In the caste system, the cost of labor remains at the minimum level, which is advantageous to both the Hindu and the Muslim rulers. Therefore, the caste system continues, but with the coming of the Muslims and their expansions of their rulers, the caste system gradually, according to some scholars, lost some of its rigidity. This was what propounded by Tarachand in his book Influence of Islam, published in 1946, who stated that Islam had modified the rigors of the caste system. Actually, other scholars had pointed out that the caste system was reduced to a certain extent, but its rigors were extended, and therefore the proposition of Tarachand is open to serious doubt. Now, what happens with the towns now and the artisans with which we are concerned at the moment? The principal effect of this coming, as has been stated by many people, many historians, including Irfan Habib, is that new technology began to appear in North India. For example, the horseshoe that was introduced, which enhanced greater speed of travel, the manufacture of paper by the end of the 13th century had eased the communication to far distant areas. The spinning wheel or charka, which is called in Hindustani, has increased the production of yarn by 6 times. The pedal-strapped loom from vertical to horizontal has also increased the capacity of production of cloth. Then comes the Persian wheel, which increased the chances of irrigation to a very great extent. Now, the problem of these innovations for the Hindu caste people, caste artisans, was that they are not allowed to change their professions. There is no horizontal mobility, neither there is any vertical mobility. So therefore, these were left open to the Muslims, both the immigrants and the converted Muslims. And we find that in the towns, the low class and low caste artisans, they were gradually being pushed out most of the time, or were taken in with very low wages. This is one of the reasons of the background of the rise of some of the religious preachers. In the case of the religious preachers, as I have referred earlier, these were called the followers of the Bhakti movement. Now, Bhakti movement, as we all know, emphasized on one God. That is a kind of monotheism. And these people, these religious preachers, were therefore called by the historians as popular monotheists, believing only in one God. But even in their preachings, as we would see, there are certain very subtle differences between them, which would be evident in the preachings when we would see between Kabir and Dadu. Some of these followers of the Bhakti movement were not low caste or low class. There were members of the priestly class as well as members of the aristocracy. For example, Chaitanya was a Brahmin and he had the largest number of Brahmin followers. Mirabai, Surdas, they were all coming from aristocratic families. So therefore, there were differences between them, and these differences we would see straight away now. Kabir was called a follower of Shaiva by a very well-known scholar, Hajari Prasad Dwivedi, who wrote a book on Kabir. He also stated that Kabir was the follower of the Nath Panthi. But we find in the Kabir's verses, which were obviously done much later since he was illiterate, in the Kabir's verses, he totally rejected these esoteric and magical practices, these bodily exercises, the asceticism, the yogic exercises, everything. So one can safely say that he was not the follower of the Naths. The question is that whether, and it has been suggested, that Kabir was much influenced by Islam. Now in the preachings of Kabir, which we would see in a moment, we would see that that is not so. There are uncertainties over the date of birth of Kabir or even the year of birth of Kabir, the place of his birth and the year of his death. Even the early life is too obscure. As I have said, he was illiterate, but he was a married man. He had a son also. And his family followed more or less the Islamic practices respecting the sheikhs and so on. So in this atmosphere, Kabir went to Benares, met some teachers, and then formulated his understanding of life, which he emphasized in one verse very clearly, that there is the unity of God. There is only one God. All other differences are artificial, created deliberately by people, and these are useless. These are not necessary for salvation. As a matter of fact, went further to say that the practice of idol worship, going to the temple, having a bath in the holy water, going to Mecca, to Kaaba, to the mosques, all these are useless. The man's understanding is in his own mind, and this he can develop by himself without the religious leaders. As a matter of fact, that he was much against the religious leaders because he postulated that the religious leaders, they were parading their book learning without understanding of God, and they are misleading the people by false images which are not necessary. He was equally against the rich and the wealthy because they serve nothing. As a matter of fact, he asked the saints not to go to the royal court at all. In this context, one might say that he was influenced by Islam on the one hand and by the Sufic doctrines on the other. Now, about his influence of Islam on him, we can say that he has already rejected all the rituals of Islam. He rejected going to Mecca, rejected going to the mosques as well as all other rituals. So therefore, he was not in any way influenced by Islam. As for the influence of the Sufis on him, there are certain controversies. One view is that the basic doctrine of the Sufis was not accepted by Kabir. What was the basic doctrine of the Sufis? The basic doctrine of Sufis, as brought from West Asia by 13th century, was that the obedience to God and God's love to man. This love to God and obedience, this was also evident in the Sufic theory of Pir and Murid, that is between the mentor and the disciple. But to Kabir, obedience to God is not mentioned. What is there is the surrender to God. Now, about the Sufic other doctrine, which is perhaps there also in the Quran, that there is a divine judgment. God is the divine judge who judges man at the end and gives rewards or punishments. It is stated that Kabir has accepted this portion. It is true that in some verses of Kabir, the divine judgment is there. One may quote to say from the verse of Kabir, who said that my Lord is a Shah. Shah is a money lender, and he lends money equally to anyone and checks the account at the end. But there is no duality. There is no other kind of action. Therefore, Kabir rejects the theory of the reward and punishment, although the divine judgment is there. Perhaps the only Sufic notion which is there in Kabir is the self-effacement, that is the surrender of the self to God. This we find in some of the verses of Kabir, and one might say that he was influenced to that extent. Kabir gained some notoriety during his lifetime. He became quite famous, had a large number of disciples. Much later, Abul Fazl, in 1595-96, referred to Kabir twice. In the first, he said that Kabir was born during the time of Sikandar Lodi, Actually, he said that he was living at the time of Sikandar Lodi, which is 1489 to 1517. Then Abul Fazl said that his thoughts and actions are so good that they bring truth straight away. And he made no partiality between Hindus and the Muslims. As a matter of fact, Abul Fazl said that when Kabir died, the Brahmins came to cremate him, while the Muslims came to bury him. Another writer, Hindu writer this time, Navajit, in his Bhaktimal written in 1600 AD, puts Kabir among the followers of the Bhakti movement. He said that Kabir did not encourage caste rules. He even did not accept the 6 schools of Brahmins, but large number of Hindus and Muslims flocked around him. So therefore, in the verses of Kabir, we find a very radical criticism of the hierarchical structure of the medieval society. He questioned again and again that why there should be inequality. He was totally against the rules of inequality. And he always emphasized that God is one. There is no difference between Hindus and the Muslims. When we come to Dadu, we see that his dates are more or less known. May not be his place of birth. He was born in 1544 and died at the age of 59 years in 1603. On the place of his birth, there is a controversy. One view is that he was born at Ahmedabad. The other view was that he was born at the Uttar Pradesh. Now, like Kabir, Dadu was also illiterate, was a married man, was a householder. And he preached in a very simple Hindi language. We know some of his names of some of his followers. One was Rajab, the other was Janagopal, and both of them stated that Emperor Akbar met Dadu near Fatehpur Sikri and discussed with him for 40 days. And that had changed the personality of Akbar. It is difficult to find any historical evidence on this, but the legend goes like that. Dadu traveled widely, went to Benares also, and even came to Bengal, where the Baul singers were attracted towards his teaching, as we find the reference of Dadu in their songs. Like Kabir, he was also a monotheist. He believes in the unity of God. And he believes that there is no difference between Hindus and the Muslims. He said again and again, I am neither a Hindu nor a Muslim. And he also questions, but mildly this time, on the social structure of hierarchy prevailing then. That there is therefore a slight difference between Dadu and Kabir. Dadu believes in the love to God, the bhakti. But Kabir, as I have said, believes in the surrender to God. But Dadu was immensely popular. He had many prominent followers. As a matter of fact, it is stated that he had 52 followers who all became prominent, and they later wrote his verses, his messages. But it is difficult to certify whether there were any additions or alterations. As happened in case of Kabir, so happened in case of Dadu. The question is that why this low caste and low class religious preachers coming to preach equality, for which we had already given the background. They had attained fame during their lifetime, but unfortunately their followers could not maintain that kind of standard, and they gradually fell into insignificance. The Kabir Panthis and Dadu Panthis practically vanished. But what these two preachers had done was to question the social structure, which they thought was completely done by people deliberately, creating caste, communal and religious problems. This is the legacy of the Indian culture that these two religious preachers had left, and that had not been surpassed since then. Thank you very much.